When you picture economic recession, you think of layoffs, job cuts, and tons of them. But implicit in that picture is a lack of hiring. You get laid off and you have to go to the unemployment line, and you remain on unemployment until the entire economy gets itself sorted out. It has a chilling effect, even if you're not one being laid off, because you're in constant fear of what would happen if you are, knowing that you can't find another job. We already have that part in the economy right now in the United States. No one is hiring, and it is causing enormous stress and strain even without the layoffs. The US is and has been halfway in recession for some time, and it is getting worse. Thus, the reaction that we see in the marketplace. I talked about gold yesterday. Interest rates, they're going down yet again. It's not just about the Fed and rate cuts. Even the mainstream media is filling up with stories because they can't ignore this any longer. Economists say the economy's great. Politicians talk about how wonderful the job market is. Yet, we all feel that there is this big chill descending across the entire labor system. Even CNBC last month had to put out a report which was titled, "Economists say the labor market is strong, but job seekers don't share that confidence." Job seekers. So the labor market is strong except for those who are seeking a job, which tells you that maybe the labor market isn't strong. First of all, they quote the usual economist. "The labor market has been fairly strong and surprisingly resilient," said Daniel Zhao, lead economist at Glassdoor. Especially after 2023, when we had headlines about layoffs and forecasts of recession. So according to the economist class and most financial observers, the economy is absolutely robust. We've got GDP, we've got the stock market, and we've got the payroll reports. Yet, for all of that goodness, all of that strength and resilience, it doesn't feel that way to way too many people on the outside looking in. And they give us an anecdote. Between the news, the radio, and the politicians just talking about how the economy is so great because unemployment is low, and just hearing all that, I just want to scream from the rooftops. Then how come no one can find a job, said Jenna Jackson, a 28-year-old former management consultant from Ardmore, Pennsylvania. She has been actively looking for a job since her layoff 4 months ago. And more we hear these same stories. And not just those who are laid off. Those who are laid off, they're stuck. We see this in continued jobless claims, in unemployment insurance payments that can keep going up, because when you are laid off, you're stuck on unemployment, just like during a recession. But again, as I said, it has a chilling effect, because even if you aren't laid off, you start thinking, boy, what happens if I am? I'm going to be stuck on unemployment. You know that there's no opportunities elsewhere. And even if you aren't being laid off, you're kind of stuck where you are too, because you don't risk quitting your job lest you have no other real place to go. It is a slow, grinding deterioration that, absent the layoffs that we all associate with recession, means real deterioration and degradation in the economy, even if it doesn't look like a recession. It's halfway to one. Again, these anecdotes are widespread. They're in a Reddit thread, r/jobs. This one was titled, "The Job Market is Awful in 2023." And this is about 6 months ago. And this one had 256 upvotes. Talking all about sharing stories of sending out tons and tons of resumes and never getting any callbacks, very few interviews, let alone finding a job. I think my favorite comment in the thread was this one. "I don't know any young person my age who has gotten a full-time position within a year that wasn't Starbucks, retail, or tourism." Again, it sounds like these are just anecdotes, crybabies whining about having to do some work to find work. But this is not just a few stories here and there. Again, the mainstream media has to pick up on it because it is a real phenomenon. It is one that is widely shared. We have a lot of data beyond just these mainstream stories. There was a study published last year, back in August, from a company called Insight Global, which is a leading national staffing company. And it said the survey, which was conducted in July among 501 recently unemployed adults actively seeking employment. That's another thing. We're not even talking about those who are no longer actively seeking employment. This study revealed that 55% of them have been searching for a new job for so long that they are completely burnt out. And remember, this is last year, last summer. It has only gotten worse since then. Furthermore, recently unemployed full-time workers say they have applied to an average of around 30 jobs and have only received an average of 4 callbacks and responses. I wonder what the response rate is in February and March of 2024. It has to be materially worse still and affecting a wider cross-section of the entire labor market. As the CEO for Insight Global said, it's no wonder that so many unemployed Americans are feeling unmotivated. Between several years of a volatile job market, headcount reductions, budget cuts, hiring freezes, and a total overhaul of the way companies are running their businesses, it can feel downright impossible to get back on track, because it is downright impossible for far too many. The number of far too many is continuously growing. Another comment that was put up there that I really like here: 44% of Gen Z respondents admit that they would rather get a sugar daddy or sugar mama than send out another blast of resumes. And before you think that this is just lazy young Americans who don't want to do the work to find work, as I said, it is younger Americans are, as workers that are coming up, they always have the hardest time getting your foot in the door and starting a career. So it's no wonder they're experiencing the worst aspects of half a recession. You have to have enormous sympathy for younger Americans, because they have lived their entire lives without ever seeing a legitimate economic boom. The same thing for millennials too. You go back to 2007 and 2008, all the statistics outside the unemployment rate show unequivocally that the labor market has been suffering for a very long period of time. Then you throw in the pandemic, the overreactions to it, and now a downturn from the supply shock that is threatening to send everyone back to the 2010s all over again. It's a toxic mix, and it is not just a bunch of whiners and crybabies. And there is a tremendous amount of data that shows the US economy is in really bad shape, even if we don't have an enormous amount of layoffs. Why is the labor market less than as strong as it's portrayed to be in the mainstream? Well, this one's pretty simple. As I've been saying for way too long already, as the supply shock, the downside of the supply shock continues to develop, what you have is the nominal slowdown. Nominal revenues begin to slow because inflation begins to slow. And as it does, that means businesses are not seeing the same nominal revenue gains, and they have to start focusing more on not just their bottom lines, but the actual amount of work and activity they're producing. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is that in real terms, the economy looks nothing like the nominal one. But businesses were willing to put up with it as long as revenues were surging. We're not really doing a lot more new business, but boy, the top line's way up, so we don't really need to make any more adjustments. But as the nominal top line starts to slow down, first thing you do is say, well, I'm going to stop hiring people because I don't really need any more. I don't really need the workers I have now, but I'm going to hang on to them just in case the economy starts revving up again at some point in the future. So you have this weird position where no one is hiring, but they're also not firing either, at least not yet. And it leaves a lot of workers caught in this limbo, this purgatory, this job market purgatory where they have no place to turn. But as the hiring freeze continues month after month after month after month, the number of people stuck in that middle purgatory limbo rises and rises and rises. And they talk to other people who are trying to work and who are still working, and it has that same psychological and sentimental effect where if you are working and maybe you're afraid that maybe you might be next on the unemployment line, you start altering your behavior. Or if you were thinking, I'm going to quit my job because I don't really like it, I'm going to find a much better one with better pay, suddenly you have to put those plans off because no one is hiring. It is half the recession. And we can see this. You've got, again, tons of data for it. Look at the services industry. personal consumption expenditures and services. We see the nominal slowdown, nominal spending for services still rising at a 6.3% annual rate in January of this year, but that's the lowest of the cycle so far, and 6.3% in nominal terms for the services industry. That's getting into recession territory already. So again, businesses are looking at their nominal revenues and then looking at their cost structure and actual amount of activity going out. For services overall, just in the PCE numbers, you can see spending in real terms has never even caught back up to the pre-pandemic trend. So nominal revenues and services are slowing. And services tend to be good paying jobs. I'm not talking about the waiters and bartenders, the Starbucks jobs, as the one Reddit commenter was. These are really good paying jobs. And yet nominal spending in services is slowing down, which means nominal revenues are slowing down. And real services output and spending hasn't really kept up pace. So it leads to, first of all, job freezes, hours cut, even though there aren't the layoffs. Even these stories that come up in the mainstream media, the way that they're written makes it seem like this is a small little problem that only you have. We have tons of data that shows this is an economy-wide problem and one that is getting worse and worse by the month. Just today, the U.S. government came out with its JOLTS numbers, the BLS report for the month of January. We'll get the payroll reports for February on Friday. But the January JOLTS numbers don't look anything like the stellar labor market that everyone was saying after they saw the payroll reports, although only part of the payroll reports, as I mentioned in the last time we went over them. JOLTS, we start out with job openings, but who cares about job openings? Those were 8.886 million, down a little bit. It's the lowest since October. Nobody cares. JOLTS job openings isn't a real statistic. It has been wildly overstating demand for labor for over a decade at this point. But that's the number that everyone associates with JOLTS. That's the one that most people focus on. And it's the wrong one to focus on. Another one, layoffs and discharges. This one hasn't picked up any of the layoffs, just like initial unemployment claims. JOLTS layoffs has been pretty much steady at around 1.6 million since the middle of 2022, with a couple variations along the way. But according to these statistics, there isn't any layoff activity going on, and that brings up questions about what that is actually measuring to. But the real numbers from JOLTS and everything that we've been talking about here, the half recession, which is a very clear and strong one already, that starts with hiring. The hiring rate fell back to 5.69 million in January. That's down from a short-term bump in December, just above the low in November. But more importantly, you can see how steady and how far the slowdown in hiring has gone thus far, to the point that the hiring rate, the number of people hired, number of workers hired in January, was about equal to 2018. You're going back 6 years. There's a lot of employment growth and population growth along the way, and you would expect that if the economy is robust, it would at the very least keep up with population growth. Instead, we see hiring drop because businesses are doing so much less of it. And then you put it in population adjusted terms, which is the civilian non-institutional population, and that's equal to around 2017. And it actually goes back further. We're talking about hiring rates that go back to 2007. So the hiring rate is slowing down and it's getting to really low levels, which matches everything that we keep hearing from these anecdotes and stories. All those poor people who are stuck looking for a job and not able to find one. Here is your proof, not able to find one. And it goes further than that. We also have data that shows that American workers are feeling it too, because they are not quitting their jobs. It's even worse than the hiring rate. According to the JOLTS figures, the quits level dropped all the way to 3.39 million in January. That's down about 250,000 since October and 500,000 since last January. Huge change from what used to be a labor shortage and the Great Resignation to, holy crap, I better stay here even though I hate it because there's no place for me to go. American workers are telling you. It's not just these stories you hear every once in a while from the mainstream media to pick on whatever poor person happens to have no job. American workers are absolutely feeling this half of the recession. That's what the quits rate is actually telling us. And that is, again, a hallmark of an economy that is moving in the wrong direction. And we have even more statistics. Of course, I've talked about the employment numbers For all the hype over the establishment survey's payroll number, we've got the hours worked number, which only creates more problems and a greater negative impression from workers themselves. Plus the household survey, especially full-time jobs. Absolutely. Remember the one Redditor comment that I mentioned here? There are no full-time jobs outside of Starbucks, assuming Starbucks will hire you full-time. There's a number of data points which all point to the same exact thing, which is exactly what the marketplace has been telling us all along, including gold now at record highs. And that is, we need to be increasingly careful and cautious about the economic situation. It looks like a soft landing or even a no landing from a certain perspective. Now, in any recession, as in any economic period, the vast majority of people are doing just fine. They'll never experience a layoff. They'll never experience hours cut or pay cut or any of these things. The problem is always at the margins. And even during the best economies, at the margins, there are still people who can't find jobs, and there's people who struggle and are unable to make a better life for themselves. That's always the case. That's always there. What happens in these poor economies or even recessionary periods is the number of people that are stuck in that category ends up rising and rising and rising. So while the vast majority, they have no idea that the recession is happening, except maybe if it shows up in the stock market, too many people get left out of the economy, and that's what makes up a recession. And that's exactly what we keep hearing from all of these stories and the data that backs them up. There are way too many people in the United States that are being left further and further and further behind. And it becomes even more painful when you put it in the perspective of price changes over the last couple of years. It gets harder to pay for the cost of just living. At the same time, it's become even harder to find a better job or even find a job. We are halfway to a recession already and have been for some time. If you're just waiting for the layoffs, you're missing the growing distress that's all over the place, all over the United States, and of course, it's worse around the rest of the world. To sum it all up, the hiring freeze is absolutely real. Not only do we have these stories, we also have the data to back it up. And that means the consequences for the hiring freeze are absolutely real too. And they continue to grow throughout the U.S. economy. We've seen it in spending numbers. We've seen it in income numbers. And unless something magically changes all on its own, it's going to continue getting worse and worse and worse, even if it does so at this incredibly slow and gradual pace. That doesn't mean it isn't happening. What it does mean is that most people outside of the bond market or now gold don't realize what's really happening. What's really happening is as close to a recession as you can get without actually having what most people picture in their mind. If you missed my video on last month's payroll report, I highly recommend you check that out. That's the one linked below because of all of the data that backs up everything that we're actually saying here for all the mainstream focus on the headlines. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Huge thank you, Eurodollar University members and subscribers. And until next time, take care.